marks another somber anniversary. 17 years since Jennifer Kesse left for work and never returned home. She was just 24 years old. Since then, her family has not stopped pushing for answers. And as West 2's Tony Atkins reports, nearly 2 decades later, Jennifer's parents are still holding out hope.
Tuesday marks 17 years of searching. Jennifer Kesse's family desperate to find her after she vanished without a trace in 2006.
But yeah, we are still out here, and yeah, we do love our daughter unconditionally. But you have to know everything, and unfortunately, we lost 10 to 12 years.
Drew Kesse, Jennifer's father, says they're hoping a new path yields new results. They've put together a team of mostly retired law enforcement professionals from all across the country, and they've also managed to get the FDLE to do a cold case review.
We're humbled. They're doing it, pro bono, and they've been able to move us forward.
Jennifer went missing on this day back in 2006. Police then found her car abandoned and released grainy surveillance video of a man they wanted to question, but the case remains unsolved, leading the family to years of frustration.
Somewhere along the line, I don't know how, where, why it happened. Interest, I think, just got lost in Jennifer's case. Maybe it was too hard. I don't know. But we wish we knew that 10 years ago, and we could have gone down this path a lot sooner.
Drew says he feels better knowing he did all he could to help learn what happened to his daughter.
With the state team, along with our team, it gives Jennifer the best chances at this point, and hopefully we can definitively say if we can find her or not. That's what we're up against. We're pretty much at the end.
And as this family continues its push for answers, anyone with information is asked to contact the family directly on social media if they have any information about Jennifer's whereabouts. Reporting in Orlando, Tony Atkins, West 2 News.
For the person coming on today is Bill Gilmore. Again, he is Jennifer Kesse's uncle. His website is inspiringhopedaily.com. Again, inspiringhopedaily.com. Definitely check him out there. You can get the book there. A lot of great information there. The book is The Aftermath of Jennifer Kesse's Abduction and Uncle's Quest for Understanding and Inspiring Life's Lessons. Whew, wow. Yeah. Bill, that was a heck of an intro.
I will make an update. So, I had been advised by several people to create my own. So I have the website for the book is now billgilmore.com.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's really simple. Yeah. So Inspiring Hope is still there, and that's going to be serving a purpose. But all things book, we're going to make it easy for people. It's billgilmore.com. So thank you for that.
All right. So we'll read that for people listening. Again, Bill, and the last name is GILMOUR.com. Again, billgilmore.com, or you can go to the inspiringhopedaily.com, whatever you choose. But Bill, sorry for that long introduction. I appreciate you coming on, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today and hopefully many more to come.
Yep, agree.
All right, so let's kick this about. Before we get into a little bit about Jennifer, tell us a little bit about yourself in general before we speak again about the book.
Well, and again, it's good because the book, I kind of chronicle my life prior to Jennifer's abduction, and like many men, there's just things that we buy into. There's certain things that we buy into in terms of culture, right? That we shouldn't be vulnerable. We shouldn't be authentic. You always want to put up barricades, right. That you can never admit weaknesses because then that's viewed negatively. So there's just a lot of that stuff that you kind of grow up with. And then that just kind of infiltrates the way you interact with people relationally, right? Whether it's your spouse, your children, other family members, it just sets us up for probably not the best relationships that we would want to have. And so for me, with Jennifer's abduction, it served as a catalyst to the point where I was so overwhelmed and distraught that it literally brought me figuratively to my knees, realizing at that moment I was just about to turn 50, and I realized how much of a mess my life actually was. Now, so it really, I describe it like being a Hollywood set. Everything looked good if you're looking at it, but behind the scenes, right? I said at one time, I felt like I was the circus act where the guy used to put a bunch of plates on sticks and run around. Well, you can only run around for so long before everything starts to crash in. Yeah. And for me, that trigger point was Jennifer's abduction. It was just that call to recognize what was going on in my own life and how bad things were. And so, as we moved through the process of COVID, I began to take some online courses to learn about writing, because I knew that I was going to write a book. I wanted to share my experience, because I moved from a position of brokenness, significant brokenness, and being, my just heart was really overwhelmed with everything that was going on. And I moved through to a point where I realized that peace, joy, and contentment can be found no matter what the circumstances are in life. Because again, one of those things that we buy in is we always thinking in terms of happiness. Yes. And the problem with happiness, it's tied or connected to happening. So whatever is happening in our lives at any given time is then the reflective of what we would call happiness. And that's not a good standard, because life's going to throw us all kinds of curves. And so does that mean that we're only going to be happy when things are well? Well, then how do we manage when things aren't going well? And so I decided to really be vulnerable. I was really clear, I think, when I prayed about how I would write this book, the Lord was very clear that I was to be extremely vulnerable, almost I'll be to the point where several people were surprised. And one of my wife's cousins actually called my wife's sister to say, I can't believe they shared that much about their marriage. And of course, my sister-in-law, Jeannie, said, well, that was the point, because none of our lives are Facebook lives, right? Our lives are messy. Relationships are messy. And that was what I wanted to try to do, is by being vulnerable myself, is to say, hey, it's okay. And actually, I think when we can get vulnerable and be honest with ourselves first, it then opens a pathway that we can begin to become the better versions of ourselves. So that's kind of a 10,000 foot, overview.
Well, we're going to keep diving deep into the book. I do want you to talk about Jennifer in general, because a lot of people that are listening to this might not be from the Central Florida region. Regardless of that, a lot of people listening to this are from Central Florida, and they will know the story. But just talk some background information about Jennifer, that people that aren't from Central Florida, or maybe were young at the time and don't even remember this. So just dive deep.
Yeah, the story of Jennifer starts back in, obviously at her birth. When my wife and I got married in 1980, Joyce and Drew had already lived in Barnegat, New Jersey. And we used to visit them often, and we really liked the area. And then after we got married and realized we wanted to own our own home, we realized, well, we weren't going to be able to do that in Monmouth County. Cost had gone high. So we ultimately bought a house on the same cul-de-sac that my sister and brother-in-law were living in. Oh, wow. And we moved in just a couple of weeks before Jennifer was born. And I was in business in Pittsburgh with my father. And that morning, it was a Friday morning, he says to me, I wonder when Joyce is going to have the baby. And I just had this overwhelming sense. I said to him, it was right around 8:30, 8:40. I said, I think she's having the baby right now. And it turns out that was the time that Jennifer was born. And so, for the early years of Jennifer, we lived, like I said, across the street. We didn't have kids for a couple more years. So she was like our first child, right? Our daughter, even though she was a niece. And then eventually Joyce and Drew moved. Drew relocated to Virginia, so we used to visit them in Virginia, and then eventually moved to Florida. So we always have fond memories of Jennifer, from the time she was an infant, and then just watching her grow over time. When we moved to Florida, she eventually went to school at University of Central Florida. So she was basically in the Central Florida region for quite a while. So she would, be visiting and stopping by. We actually had her college graduation at our home, because it was just going to be easier for all the people that she knew from Central Florida. And of course, she ultimately took the job with Central Florida Investments. And then, as you know, the rest of the story, everything is moving really well. Get your first car, get your condo. I mean, she was on a great trajectory. She was a great person. And, it's just like everything was in front of her. And then within a couple of months of all that good stuff, something happened. And, and that's what 17 years later, it's just hard to fathom, how does somebody vanish without a trace?
Right. I want to dive a little bit deeper into your relationship with Jennifer, Bill, because, I have family members in my family. Some of them I'm close to. And I know you just spoke about your relationship with Drew and Joyce and how close you guys all were.
Yeah.
But if you just can dive a little deeper into that, because, we're all not as close as it may seem with our family members.
Yeah.
Some just want to live on their own terms and others want to be close. So just talk about that relationship a little bit more in depth, if you could.
Well, I think as everybody, all your listeners appreciate, we're in a highly mobile society. So the idea that families stay living within miles of each other isn't as common anymore. So obviously, once they moved to Virginia, that changed the dynamic a little bit. We got a chance. We would visit when we could. When they moved to Florida, that made it a little bit more challenging because it's a bigger deal, right? But we stayed connected as best we could under those, geographic distance issues. When we moved down there, then obviously that made a little bit of a difference. We were able to get over to Tampa, then over to Brandon. And so we were there for some of the big events. But as you all know, once our kids, move from middle school into high school, they're now really spending more time with their friends. And so it's that kind of, I think most people would appreciate that's that kind of relation. When you get together, everything is great. You share a lot of good stories and memories, look back at the old films, and, those things help you with the recognition. But I think we used to kid that I had a special bond with Jen because it was funny. Every time I was holding her, she would start crying. And so we had this phrase, I called it out of the will, Bill, I just say, you're out, it's just, but it was like, we just used to joke about it. But, it's like anything else. I think when we look back, we wish that we had been able to stay in closer geographic, because you do miss out on some of those big milestones. So you're only, you're kind of like involved from afar in large part. A lot easier today with FaceTime, like my sister today, FaceTime so I could see the, Logan's girls. And so that helps bring things a little bit closer. But like Jennifer was with us. My son Matthew had his birthday on the 28th. Jennifer was born on the 20th. I was the 24th. My father was the 26th. So we had birthdays that were close by. But she had been visiting with us when my mother was down that December before she was abducted. My son Matthew's birthday was on the 28th of December. So we had all gone out together for dinner. We got some great photos. Actually, ironically, some of the photos.
Hold on, and I apologize for interrupting you, Bill, but
no.
So you were down in Florida.
Oh, yes.
At the time of the abduction.
Yeah, because we moved to Florida in April of '99. Yeah.
Okay, so you were down there for quite a while.
We were already there. And so it was the craziest thing that happened out of that was that after Jennifer was abducted and we're trying to find photos, we couldn't find photos of her not smiling. And then as we started going through, we finally got the film processed from when she was with us just maybe 3 weeks before. And there was a picture of her mid-bite with food. And that was the only picture we could find where she wasn't smiling, because one of the things that they were talking about when you're trying to put these missing posters out there, you don't want to show a picture smiling because that's not what someone's going to see, right? If somebody see her, it's going to be more of a concerned look. It wouldn't be with a smile. So we ended up using that one photo. We cropped it, but it was and the only reason she wasn't smiling because I caught her with food in her mouth.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so that some of the images of the missing posters, other than the ones that were smiling, because those were the first ones that were done. Then later, as we put them in different languages, we used the photo of when she was at our house, like December 28th. The Central Florida community was just so good. I mean, there were literally vinyl posters of Jennifer on electric boxes at major intersections all over the Central Florida area. But one of the things that was really encouraging to us was not only the First Baptist community, because of the connection there. Drew's boss at the time of the abduction lived in Orlando and attended First Baptist. His wife taught at the school. So right after Jennifer was abducted, they invited them to church that next Sunday, and they got them introduced to the staff. They brought them up, they prayed for them. And then, of course, when we were organizing events, the church was very good about promoting it. And literally, we had hundreds and hundreds of people that would come to the community center at the Mall of the Millennia, would say that they saw Joyce and Drew on Sunday, heard the call to come out and help. But we literally, this is unbelievable. We had people that saw her story that were on vacation and decided to give up a day and come over and do what they could help. Because we got to the point, there were so many people showing up to help that we had to kind of organize a little bit. And so most of the time I would help do the presentations and help people understand what was going on, what we were looking to accomplish, especially with flyer distributions, because we had everything pretty well organized. And that freed up Joyce and Drew and Logan to be working more with the law enforcement as well as the media. But it was just overwhelming to us that people would come in and say, we saw the story and we decided that we wanted to come over and offer help. So they would take a day from their vacation and then they would just go out and do whatever. That was the kind of support. And I still, by the way, despite all that goes on in the news today, I still think that's real community. That's still there. Communities still come out to support people that they don't even know when a crisis like this happens. And so that is something that we've always, always cherished. That kind of support. It was overwhelming when you would come in the mornings and see the numbers of people waiting in line to get in at that Mall of the Millennia into the community center just to offer whatever help they could. It was simply amazing.
Go ahead.
I mean, and obviously a big thanks to the management at the time at the Mall Millennia, because they were so gracious. I mean, they basically gave up 2 good sized, what they call community rooms. And we were using those rooms every day for months. And then we would organize other events with Crime Watch and some other organizations. So we would run events for families to come to get their kids fingerprinted, anything so that people would raise awareness that something like this can happen. And so you have to be prepared. And one of the interesting things that my brother-in-law had done, it's something that is still needed. And I know that people that I knew around the country from work told me time and time again that they appreciated the fact that they were able to tell Jennifer's story to their own children as a way to say, this is what Drew used to do when he would speak to the kids in high schools and stuff, and say that when your parents love you. So when your parents are asking you, where are you going? Who are you going with? What are you wearing? And all this other kind of thing. It's not because they're trying to be nosy. It's because something like this can happen. And the first thing the police are going to ask is, who were they with? What were they wearing? Where were they going? Because otherwise you have no starting point. And unfortunately, when you're young, you always think nothing's going to happen, right? Nothing's going to happen to me. But what if it does? And so this idea that you have to plan accordingly. And so that's why getting photographs, we would say, get photographs both smiling, but also not smiling. Because again, if something happened to a person, if they get abducted or kidnapped or whatever, they're not smiling, right? So you need to get pictures, not that they're like a mugshot, but you know what I mean? More of that serious look, so that's what somebody would be looking out for, not a bubbly, smiley person. So there was a lot, I mean, for a long time, there was a lot of things like that our way as a family to give back to the community, to just raise awareness that if you think about it, Jennifer was one of the most safety conscious people that I know, right? So to the point where if she was leaving a darkened mall or a restaurant at night, she would be on the phone talking to somebody until she got into the car and locked the doors. So if somebody that's aware, something can happen. How about today and I talk about this in the book, about the amount of time people are spending on their smartphones. I mean, literally, people are walking around with their phones. They're not really aware of what's going on around them. I mean, you're an unbelievable target, but you're not thinking about it. And I hate to say it, but right, you have to, especially if you're a teenager or a young person, you need to be thinking of your own security. I'm
laughing not because it's funny, but because it's true. Right. Because you see all these little kids. I mean, I drive, there's a high school and a middle school right near where I'm at right now at the moment. And kids were getting let out of school today, and they just oblivious to walking across the street. They're going like this on the phone. And I'm like, what the heck is going on in our society? That's a whole different topic for another time.
But from a security and safety perspective, it's important that people Because otherwise, if you're so focused on that, then you're not self-aware in your surroundings.
Right. Yeah. And people, and I know
So,
Jennifer and they go into the story, and I've
yeah.
listened to my research on this, her abduction. And with that, she was, and you can clarify this if this is true or not. I believe Joyce said this, but you can clarify if this is true or not. That right before, the month before she got abducted, they were watching Law and Order, which they used to watch very frequently. With that said, they were talking about if Jennifer ever did get abducted, what she would do in the car. And she was very vocal on, how she would get out of a trunk, how she would, try to do all these different things in the car. But go ahead.
No, I remember Joyce talking about that. And also, by the way, it was interesting because Heather from the True Crime Podcast said that the largest percentage of people that follow True Crime Podcast are women. And she said, and some of them, because of that, I mean, they're looking to learn. So there's two aspects. One is that they're looking to learn, so how can I protect myself? But also, women are generally going to be a lot more compassionate and caring, right? So they're going to have a heart for the families, to want the best and to be praying for them and hope that things work out, because they know what it would be like as a mom to experience that.
I didn't know any of that information, but thank you for bringing it to my attention and everybody that's listening. I just want to dive a little bit deeper before we kind of go into the meat and potatoes of, like I said, I want to talk about Jennifer's story. I believe that's important. That's what the interview is about. But again, some of these questions that were written to us to ask you, Bill, I don't want to get into the whole story again and kind of drag the family down. And I know that Drew and Joyce have been through hell, plus 20, probably right, plus 1,000. And I don't want to get into all the weeds and stuff with this, but we'll break some of this stuff down. Again, for people listening, Bill Gilmour, BillGilmour.com. It's BillGilmour.com. Let's talk about this. A lot of people, again, do know Jennifer's story. If you can just break down the day of January 23rd of 2006 and what happened.
And of course, I was, we were up in Lake Mary, but on the 23rd, it was like a normal day. She had just come back from her vacation with Rob, right, and she went directly from South Florida to work, came home, and had the phone calls with everybody like she normally would. So there was nothing out of the ordinary. Everything was just as the normal routine would be. And then the next morning was when everything changed. And it was interesting because my sister, we lived the closest. We were probably 20 minutes away. Right. So I'm in the air, flying up to Newark, New Jersey, because I had business meetings up in New Jersey. Wow. And literally Joyce and I played telephone tag all day long. It wasn't until 6 o'clock, 5:30, 6 o'clock on that Tuesday that we finally connected. And I could tell by her voice that something serious had happened. And then she said, Jennifer's missing. We haven't been able to reach her all day. I mean, where it's like your mind immediately goes to like what happened and everything else. And so I quickly, told my business partners, and then I made arrangements and flew back home. So when I got back on Wednesday morning, I went directly to Jen's condo. And by that time, Drew had already got a lot of things organized. Obviously working for Staples, got flyers made up. So everybody was doing.
Can I just interrupt you? Sorry, yep. I have to interject and ask this question. Yeah. I didn't get a chance to ask Drew this question, but I want to ask you. I was listening to a lot of different podcasts, and I just, again, want to set the record straight. Before everybody got in there, I know a lot of people got into Jennifer's apartment, and that was kind of the staging ground for months. Yeah. Before people got in there and put their fingerprints all over the place, was that apartment checked for fingerprints, for evidence, for anything?
Well, the interesting thing is 17 years later, I'm going to say that I don't believe what was done what should have been done. Let's put it that way, because I think Drew raised that question later and asked, well, now you're looking to do more, but we've already had all these other people here. So again, you got to remember that in those first 24, 48 hours, maybe 72 hours, well, actually up until they found the car. But so those first 48 hours, from the police perspective, This was a 24-year-old, probably had a spat with somebody and just decided to lay low or whatever. Which the family said that it wasn't Jen. Her employer said it wasn't. So they should have paid attention that it wasn't. I mean, the families are all going to say that, right? But when your employer says the same thing, that this is not this, if Jennifer was going to be late for a meeting, she would call and let people know she was going to be late. So this was out of character. They should have taken it seriously. Unfortunately, they didn't.
Was Rob there though?
No, he was in South Florida.
But did he drive up a day later?
Obviously, once we knew something was wrong, he came up. But yeah,
right. Yeah, I knew he wasn't there at the beginning, but yeah, he was 3 hours away, of course. But
yeah,
regardless of that, I mean, even if he said it at the time when he's up there, they really should have known something then.
Sure. Again, because again, you're in the heat of the stress of the moment, and it was just like Joyce and Drew. They lived in Bradenton, so they're coming over. Everybody's coming, and people. So her sorority sisters, her friends, everybody was coming in, and everybody's trying to do what we can do, and so we weren't. That should have been something the police should have said right off the bat, right? They should have just said, "Well, we're gonna seal this up. We're gonna do whatever." But unfortunately, that didn't happen.
Yeah, I have, we've talked about this off the record, and we don't have to go too much on the record about this. I believe there was some issue with the police dropping the ball. We talked about the no Spanish speaking officers there.
Yeah.
Ask questions when you have 100 million illegal immigrants all over the place. And then you have
in fairness to law enforcement, and let's face it, I mean, it's hard for us because to us, this is the first time, hopefully, only time. But for them, they're dealing with these kinds of things on a day-to-day basis. So there is kind of like I'd say textbook, but there's kind of a script that they kind of understand that in probabilities, these things kind of self-resolve. So you know what I'm saying? So even back then, the idea that this would have gotten elevated for whatever reason, the triggers that we would have thought should have been taken seriously, like the family and the employer collaborating, her personality and the way in which she conducted herself, you would have thought that would have changed the dynamic. It just, unfortunately, it didn't.
I do think you're being very fair to the police officers there.
Again, like we say, we're in the situation we're in. It's only in hindsight that we can look back and say, yeah, they should have done it.
Just to say,
by the way, the first 48 hours is one thing, but then the stuff that followed that's on them. Right. Not keeping the family appraised of everything that was going on, not communicating well. So that's on them 100%. But I'm going to give them that leeway in that first 48-hour period to say that this would have looked like a lot of other kinds of cases like this. So they're going to go with probabilities.
Well, I was told that the first 48 hours is the biggest for the missing persons case.
Absolutely.
And if you don't find that person within that period of time, it's extremely hard after that because, again, it's extremely important. The Spanish speaking, not having an officer there, that was a big deal. I'm sorry. I think that was really horrific. Even in 2006, that's a huge Spanish speaking area, Orlando. I think that was horrific.
Hire an interpreter?
Right, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, come on. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
The idea to say is that since we don't, well, we're going to we're just going to dismiss the people that should have been talked to. That's just, but yeah, so that's just like pouring salt in a wound, right?
Yeah, and just to put the exclamation point on this question and answer for this question, Bill, this area is not the greatest area. I'm sure the police knew that. I mean, they're not dummies. They work in the city. They know what areas are good and what areas are bad. Right outside of this area was a pretty horrific area. Regardless of that, you have sex trafficking is sky high in Orlando, which I didn't know. And I told you this before the interview started until I researched it myself. Orlando and Tampa are sky high at the top of the list in the U.S. So, I mean, we have a good looking woman that's getting abducted. I mean, come on, man. I mean, we got to think somewhat logically. We can play it out and then we'll move on, but we can play it out and say, hey, maybe she had the spat. Maybe I'm not going to believe the family, even though I believe, you should have been believed, or along with the employer, as you said, corroborating the same story. But even if, let's play it out and give them some leeway here and say, okay, we're going to just, negate that. But all these other things are not fitting into place here. I'm sorry,
And that's
the
why I
sex
said,
trafficking, the not having a Spanish speaking officer or interpreter, as you stated, it's kind of pretty ridiculous. That's a joke. That's on them.
Absolutely, 100%.
So,
And that shouldn't happen. And again, I go back to the idea that if anybody that's involved, I don't care whether you're with the chief of police, the leadership of that department, for 1 second, put yourself in the position of a family that's going through this and try to do the things that you would want done if it was your relative, your family member, right? It's not hard.
I want to go into an audience question that was very much asked quite a few times. And again, we're not going to break through too many of these, but this was been asked a lot. And I did, I believe I brought this up with another person that was a police officer that we had on to talk about this case. But regardless of that, there was a big issue in this case about the employer, Westgate Lakes, whatever we want to call it. You had the correct name, but it is under Westgate Lakes. Regardless,
it's Central Florida Investments was the financial arm of Westgate Resorts.
Okay, right. I'm saying Westgate Lakes. I know that's the condo place. On I Drive, but Westgate Resorts. Thank you for correcting me on that. Okay, so with that said, there was a person that was an employee that made a report about the boss trying to date Jennifer. Jennifer was not interested with the boss, rather. Obviously, she was going out with Rob. I've listened to a lot of podcasts that brought that up. But I've also listened to a lot of podcasts now that said it wasn't just the boss that was interested in Jennifer. It was the employee that was ratting out the boss. And I believe the person's name, and I don't know, should we bring up the person's name?
No, I mean, because I think at this point it's not helpful ultimately. And I know that when Drew and I talked about this, there's a lot of these things that they were seemingly pathways, but ultimately deemed not. And so that was pretty well vetted as to the understanding I have that those things were vetted. They pop up like in a normal course of investigation. You're going to be looking at all these types of things, but that was ultimately vetted out as not having any credibility to it.
Okay, very good. Okay, so we'll move on from that. That was asked by quite a few people, so I just wanted to just get that out of the way. We will also, just to kind of cap off these audience questions and move back into the book, there was I was told that there was like 20 seconds missing on the point. The person that drove the car and parked it, he was in the car for 32 seconds. He gets out. There's film of him walking. Then I was told that there's like 20 seconds that are missing off that tape. Is that true? Is that false? Can we set the record straight?
Now we're going back to 17-year memory. I don't necessarily have a recollection to be able to be specific, but I do recall that obviously the quality of the film, the equipment at that time, that was the explanation as to the reasons why there were certain gaps and things. And some of that had to do with the way they were processing the film, right? So that trying to use one technology versus another. But again, the frame rates, there were so many things about the older technology that it was just hard to to put it back together again in a way that you would get what you were looking for. And of course, that person was also the luckiest person at the time in the sense that his face or her face, most likely him, was blocked every other frame by a fence pole.
Right.
So there's not much you can do. But having said that, I would say, again, because I had spent a number of years in biomechanics, motion analysis, and that type of thing, there was enough. The film that was shown on the media multiple times, and it was available on the website, there was enough information that if you knew that person, you would say, by the way in which they were moving, you would say, that looks like so-and-so. So there was enough information. And we all know this to be true because we've seen, identified, or believed that we knew who the person was in a darkened parking lot coming at us. We know them by the way in which they move. And so I've always strongly believed that somebody does know who that person of interest is, because it was on the news continuously. There was enough information of that person moving that somebody would say, that looks an awful lot like, right? Now, go back a second and then reframe and say, well, depending upon if it was a Spanish, if it was a Spanish speaking person, well, then we can't assume that the person that knew them would have been able to, unless they were watching a Spanish station at the right time and saw the film, they might not have even seen it. But at the end of the day, there was enough movement of that person that if you knew that person, you would be able to call and say, I think that looks like so-and-so. So nothing ever came of that. So when you think about it, Jennifer's been missing. We know she was abducted. The person of interest nothing has ever come up about that missing, the person of interest. So it's baffling, and that two people can essentially vanish without a trace.
I want to talk about the book and what made you want to write this book. I know you kind of tapped into it a little bit earlier, saying, at this time, 50 years old, you started looking at your life and, what was good in it, what was bad, what you needed to rework. Is that the main reason, or was there other reasons just to bring like the story to light in general?
Oh, yeah, that's actually twofold. So first, without a doubt, it is to just be able to share vulnerably so that others can resonate and maybe see themselves in the story and say, my preferred future is still ahead of me. As long as I'm breathing, I still can rewrite the last chapters of my own life. But clearly, the intent is, when I'm writing this, I'm writing, when they say when you're writing for the one. So the one that I chose to be writing to was probably a 25-year-old male and potentially somebody that might have been involved in Jennifer's abduction. So the goal, in the manner in which I was trying to write in a conversational style, is that if somehow somebody involved in this, somebody either involved directly or indirectly knows about this case, reads it, I want their hearts to be broken. I want them to realize that, listen, we've all made mistakes in life, but it's never too late to rectify. It's never too late to come forward and say what you know and help to provide closure for my sister and brother-in-law and Logan and the entire family. And not just our family, but there's lots of other families that are experiencing the same thing. So the broader reach is hopefully that just as human beings, we can get a perspective to say, are we going to remain self-centered and selfish to the point that there's the ripple effect of damage that is collateral damage to people around us? Or do we say, I'm going to take responsibility for my life to this point, but I'm going to look for help to try to change that trajectory? And that's really, through the book, I've got other stories of other people, whether it's after suicide, after prison, after enough collections of things so that people realize that the common element here is that we can go through really bad trials and testings in our life, but we can also come through them. And when you're in the midst of these trials, you're not alone, right? There are people, but you have to be willing to open up to allow people into your life so they can help walk with you through it.
A lot of people that are listening, unless they had a child that passed away or have went through an abduction or a disappearance of their own child, with that said, they don't understand at all. They can pretend to emphasize and you can, accept it, but they still don't understand or know. Can you talk about the stress that this issue created, not just on you and your wife, but obviously Drew and Joyce and the rest of the family in general, and how you guys are trying to somewhat recover your life back with all the tragedy that's come about?
Well, you raised a really good point, so let me address that first. And that is
Sure.
that while and I talk about this, in one of the chapters, I talk about comparative suffering. I did some research on this and I realized, because we have a tendency that we have a tendency to compare. So let's say, for instance, I'm talking about my niece's abduction and somebody would say, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine what that's like. So then they diminish something that they're going through. So that's ultimately not helpful. So the common theme that I was trying to bring across is that hopefully all of us want the relationships in our life to be the best that they can. We should hopefully all be seeking reconciliation if there's a broken relationship. And what we want to do is move forward to a point where we can reconcile and be in a better relationship with people. So that's a theme that everybody can relate to, because we all have messy family dynamics. We have messy friendships and things like that. So there is a commonality there. And so some of that is just looking like, how can we move towards that? So to the question about the stress, I don't think that there really is an answer, because the reality of it is it's always in the back of your mind. Obviously, Joyce, Drew, and Logan, much more. Right. But the old saying that they say that time heals old wounds, that's just flat out wrong. It can't. Okay. Time passes, but the wound is still there. And at some level, as we've talked about earlier, is that 17 years later, it just continues to wear, because as a family, you continue to strive to keep a Jen story in the news with the hope that one day somebody who can offer help, their heart breaks and they come forward with information that can at least bring closure to the family. We'd love to get Jen back, but if it isn't that, at least if we can have closure, then maybe you can then readjust and move forward. But
so obviously, yeah, go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry.
When you have an open-ended situation like this, I think it's really hard, because it's always present, right? You can't move past it because it's always with you.
So, Bill, obviously the closure hasn't come yet. My question is, how does the family stay together? I mean, and I know this is more of a question for Joyce and Drew, especially because, they've been through the ringer for 17 years. And obviously it still hasn't stopped. And they'll be looking at pictures and they'll think of Jennifer, a song, a movie, whatever it may be, Law and Order for that matter. And that those memories just keep recycling through, their minds. So but obviously these people. So give us an answer.
So they have the bonds of being married for 43, 44 years. I believe it is 78. So it's almost going to be 45 years, I think. So they have that.
Impressive. Yeah.
And I think that one of the best gifts that they received is the 2 grandchildren. And so, that brings joy. So there's a flip side, right? It brings tremendous joy and excitement that they as grandparents, get to see these 2 young girls grow up. But at the same time, there's always that void, right? So you're basically in this tension that it's right now, it's an irreconcilable tension. It just is. And so I think that they just have to, they continuously navigate between those two. And obviously you're going to always have moments, like you said, milestone things, birthdays, the 24th of January, Easter. There was all these things bring them up, but they've been able to, I don't even know how, but they have been able to hold it together. I think that
because you see a lot of families, when something this tragic happens, they just blow up and they get divorced or they hate.
I was going to say that I think that they are definitely on the majority of families would have fractured as a result of this, but they've been able to hold together. And that's also a story maybe one day that they'll talk about as well, because you have to still find a way to hold together. And maybe you're holding together because you're waiting for the day that you get the answer. You're waiting for the day that maybe Jennifer reappears in our lives again. So you always, you want to hold together for the hope, that hope that one day that you're going to get an answer, and then you want to be able to be there for each other at that moment. That's why I'm looking forward to next week when we'll be able to all be together. It's just, you have to rejoice and celebrate the moments you currently have without maybe overemphasizing some of the things that we have to carry. And obviously they carry the greatest burden, without a doubt.
After 17 long years, people have put, again, you, Joyce, Drew, Logan, through the ringer. I've heard the stories about, they get the calls of, at the beginning of this, of people saying that they were the person of interest, or all these wacky things that I can't even comprehend, doing these to people that I can't stand. How do you keep it together?
So to be clear, obviously for the rest of the family, the one thing that I would say, Drew primarily, he shouldered the majority of all this as a way to insulate everybody else, because as he would say, what's the point of everybody knowing every little thing that's going on? Because then it would just create more anxiety, more stress, and it isn't helpful. And so he ultimately has shouldered the greatest amount of all of this. And I say it in the book that he is one of the most talented people, strongest person that I've ever known. And the fact that he continues to hold it together, he's holding it together for Jen. He's holding it together for his family. And that's why we keep going back to the idea that if there's anybody that knows anybody at the Florida law enforcement, is to make sure that they understand that the goal here is they have given 5 or 6 specific things that they would like to be addressed. Please just focus on those things and then do as they ask. Have a meeting, sit down so that they can know that they've done everything that they can possibly do. That's what the help would be. And that's what I think is going to help alleviate a lot of this additional stress, is that they've worked it to a point and all they're asking is, let's go over these things and then we can rest.
What do you hope people, go ahead.
And I mean, rest meaning whatever that's going to mean, but at least know that you've done everything you can possibly do.
Right. Bill, what do you hope people learn from the book today that you put out, obviously?
Well, a couple of key high level things. One is that hope is possible, that peace, joy, and contentment can be found no matter what the circumstances of life are. But the most important thing is the focus on restoration of relationships, reconciliation, because let's face it, so much of our everyday lives are relationships that are messy. We carry them around. And so even just most recently, one of the things that I recognize personally is that I've generally been viewed as a peacemaker. But if you're trying to be a peacemaker, there is a cost. And by that, I mean that if you're always trying to, try to keep the peace among people when there's issues that need to be addressed, I realize there's 2 things that don't happen. One, that you don't allow a relationship that can grow to grow because you're not addressing things that should be vocalized, right? You should come out and just get it on the table. And then secondly, there are relationships that should end that you don't allow to end because you're staying in this messy middle. And so I think for me, that's one of the big takeaways, is to begin to be more honest with people when there's challenges in a relationship, lovingly discuss it. And because then one of 2 things will happen. Either that relationship will begin to work in a pathway that'll become stronger, or you realize very quickly it's a relationship that needs to end, because we all have to have relational boundaries. We don't need to stay in situations that are difficult and challenging. Why? I mean, if you just carry around that unnecessary stress and anxiety that you shouldn't be.
I appreciate you talking about this to the viewers and the listeners in general. Again, BillGilmore.com. Definitely check them out. Definitely get the book. It's the aftermath of the Jennifer Kesse abduction and Uncle's quest for understanding an expiring life lesson. So you can get the book, obviously, at the website, BillGilmore.com. How can people follow you on social media? And also, if they do want to help, I know there's still the GoFundMe up there,
Yes.
as far as for Jennifer. And for people that are listening, these people have been through the ringer. The GoFundMe is to help them with, these investigators that are still on the case, all the stuff. I mean, they've spent, and I've heard the stories personally, one-on-one, they've spent a lot of money on trying to get Jennifer back home and trying to solve this case. So this isn't just money that's just going down the toilet. This is money that's going to a valuable cause to try to bring someone home that's been away for 17 years. But go ahead, Bill, if you could just tell
the best thing is on the website, I have a contact. My email is there. My cell phone number is there. That's the best way. I haven't yet. I've never been a big necessary fan of the social media. That may be something that I'll adjust over time. But right now, I mean, direct contact works perfectly fine.
And for people listening, BillGilmore.com, GILMOUR.com. Definitely check them out. Definitely get the book. If for people in Central Florida that are listening to this, this case backwards and forwards. And, there'll be stuff in this book that you may not have heard before. And it may also teach you lessons about other obstacles that you may personally have went through in life, or maybe a friend or a family member has went through life. And it's all about learning and reading and growing your mind and
Exactly.
using your critical thinking skills, which a lot of people haven't been using in the past 3 years. So let's do that again.
Well said. Well said. Great. That's a great way to end.
All right, Bill. Well, hey, I appreciate having you on. I hope we can do this again down the road. If people are in the Orlando area, June 25th, First Baptist Church, definitely check it out. It's 3000 South John Young Parkway, Orlando. It's going to be on June 25th, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Going to be doing a book launch event. There's going to be all kinds of stuff going on there. Do it because you're an Orlando resident. Do it to help out this valuable cause. And obviously, if you can pick up the book, we hope you do that too. So again, BillGilmore.com. Thanks so much, Bill.
Thank you. And thank you to all your listeners.